sorry, I'm still muted. Okay, take two. Hi everyone, welcome to Awkward Devs 116. Couple things on the agenda today. The first of which is just going over the Ropsten fork that happened 2 days ago now. I don't know if anyone wants to give a quick update. I guess, yeah, I can give some general one and then I'll just ping people who I know did a bit more. So high level, I think it went okay. We had the fork. It took a couple minutes to find the block on Ropsten after, because I think a lot of the old mining power didn't switch over. Luckily, at least Besu had a miner and they mined the first block a few minutes after. Everyone was on the same chain after that. I think there was one bad block mined on the old chain, and that was it. There was a small bug in the Forkmon software, which made the hashes shown on Forkmon, although they were all consistent on Forkmon, they differed from everywhere else, which was also all consistent. And we found that that was a bug with one of the underlying libraries, or not a bug, but just one of the underlying libraries that calculated the block hash on Forkmon did not have London support, so it got to a different hash. But that aside, everything seemed to work well. I know the Besu team ran a pretty big spam test on the network yesterday. They ran the spammer for like 12, 15 hours. We got the base fee up to thousands of GOE, and then they shut it down and it went back down to its minimum value where I think it's sitting now. We had people send 1559 and non-1559 style transaction. I had somebody kind of deploy a smart contract, add some storage slots to it, clear those storage slots, and then self-destruct the smart contract. And that seems to have gone well, and the network hasn't split. So 3529 seems like it's implemented correctly across the clients. The only kind of odd thing I've seen, or I guess there were two odd things. One was Vitalik mentioned that the kind of distribution of the block gas usage was a bit odd, where there were a lot of blocks that were like 80% full. And I think somebody looked into that and it seemed due to how the transactions from the spammer were batched, and like the gas cost used by those transactions. And then finally, somebody posted like yesterday some transaction that they said worked before and doesn't work anymore. I don't think anyone's quite looked into that yet. Yeah, that's kind of all I've seen, I guess, over the past 2 days. I don't know if anyone wanted to add anything else.
That's a pretty great synopsis.
Thanks. Yeah, and I guess, yeah, so the thing I had on the agenda, and I kind of discussed, I think, with people before, was stress testing Ropsten. I feel like we've kind of did that pretty extensively already. I know, Marius, you also wanted to do it with your tool, which is different from the one from Besu. Do you have any updates or just thoughts on that?
I already sent some transactions today, but I didn't push it the way Bisu did yet.
Okay.
I don't know if it would make sense to do it together. So we have like a huge chunk of transactions. But in general, I think it's, I don't know, we've pushed the network to way more than mainnet is going to be probably. So I don't know if it makes that much sense to push it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could probably run it for like, at least an hour with the two of them together. But I agree, we've seen, just to make sure that transactions from, like, a lot of transactions from two different sources work. But I think, yeah, in terms of handling the load, it seems like it's worked well.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Trent.
Was there any, I remember you pointed out that there was it looked like the base fee was updating outside of the 12.5%. Did you look into that, or was it just
yeah, I think it was Peter who pointed this out. I think yesterday, Peter, on the Get Discord, you shared like some base fee, I think, had gone from like 240 to 370. I don't know if you have more thoughts on that. I looked at like several blocks and yeah, I couldn't find something like that, but yeah.
I only saw it on that wash and burn website, two subsequent blocks,
Oh,
but I don't know whether it could be, for example, a bug. So I don't know what happens if there's a reorg of say one or two blocks, and that could explain that if one side fork pushes the base fee up, whereas the other side fork pushes it down. I don't know how these reorgs are handled by that website, so it could be just a fluke of the website.
got it.
The website should calculate it correctly. I think so. It calculates the base fee, or it takes the base fee directly from per block from the block itself.
Yeah, but what I mean is that if you report the basic for block n as a certain number, and then there's a reorg which pushes it drastically in the other direction, then the block n plus one you will have. So block n won't be the parent of block n plus one, and I don't know whether does the website fix the already reported numbers, or does it only report for
No. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. So if a reorg happens, the old block will just be in the UI. So we don't update every block if a reorg happens or something like this.
Yes.
Also the total base fee is slightly incorrect because it cannot compute reorgs. The total amount of stuff burned.
So I guess with all that, I'm curious how the different clients are feeling about deploying this on mainnet. Do people want to potentially set a block now? Do we want to wait? Basically, if we wait 2 weeks, we can see the two other testnets fork. One thing I've been doing, I did it in the past week along with TJ Rush from TrueBlocks, is kind of recalculating the difficulty bomb stuff. It seems like we're gonna start seeing the impact roughly after block 1.3 million or 13 million, sorry. So basically that would be any time after like the first week of August. It won't be as high as it was in Muir Glacier. And I kind of had the charts on GitHub showing the difference, but if we feel confident in London, there's probably some value in picking a block before 13 million, because then we just kind of save one update from the difficulty bomb. If we feel like we want to see more of the network's fork and we're willing to wait a bit later, then the impact is we'll see something between 20 to maybe 50,000 blocks in the new period of the difficulty bomb before it gets reset. So I'm curious what are people's thoughts about that. How confident do they feel about London, and do we want to see more before we pick a block, basically, or are we comfortable doing that right now?
So I guess I can go first. One of the catches with testing 1559 on testnets is that essentially, if you look at Ropsten, the base fee is 0 or hovering around 0 because the blocks are simply empty. And if you do a quick skim over Gurley or Rinkeby blocks, you will kind of see the same thing, that they are less than 50% full, which means that if we ask miners to double the block limits, then they will be a quarter full. So essentially, in both test networks, we kind of expect the base fee to drop to 7. So none of the testnets will be a realistic scenario for mainnet.
Even when we see the effects of spamming?
Sorry?
So even, do you think that it was not a successful test, even in the context of the spamming that's going on and is still planned? I mean, we're definitely going to see blocks over 50% full. It'd be contrived, but we'll see that a case.
Yeah, of course. I just meant that we won't really see organic traffic pushing the base limit up and down.
So I'm not sure if that's an argument. I guess, one way to interpret this is like we're not going to learn that much more from the Ropsten and Rinkeby, or sorry, the Gordy and Rinkeby fork. I don't know. If that's the case, then there's probably value in just setting a block sooner rather than later, and obviously continuing to kind of manually test things in the meantime. Yeah, I don't know. How do other teams feel about this?
So my point wasn't really an argument for and against, it was just a data point.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Does the call have to be made on an all core devs call? Like, what about an off cycle, like next Friday instead?
So basically, we see Gordy and we pick, right? Is what you're.
Yeah. It seems like the rollout on Ropsten was a little bumpy in terms of coordination with the miners and so forth. So it might be good to see if we can have a smoother rollout with Gorley, just to see what that looks like.
Yeah, I think if we do if we do that, we'll probably have to reconfirm the block anyways on all core devs. I think it's kind of the main way that everybody hears about it. We can agree to one off cycle. I suspect we don't gain, we're basically at best gaining a week, right? Like Gordy's going to fork next Wednesday. And then, if everything goes well, then maybe next Friday or Monday, we can pick a block. I don't know, from the client teams, does that make a difference to know it 4 days in advance next week if everything goes well, or?
Honestly, I don't think it would. So as long as the fork block is give or take a month ahead, it doesn't really matter if it's give or take a week.
Got it.
One question I had was, are the clients planning on doing one more release before mainnet fork?
They have.
Oh, right, of course. Yeah, that's true. Set the fork block. Good point.
But I guess, is your question more about features?
Yeah, there were a couple of things. There's a bug in Open Ethereum with the ETH call method, and then Marius and I were talking about there may have been a regression in Geth for tracing contract internal transactions. So there were just a couple of things it would be nice to get in before the fork.
Don't use Open Ethereum, move to Erigo.
Sorry, what?
Don't use Open Ethereum, move to Erigo. Open Ethereum is deprecated.
I believe it still plans on being London compatible, though, right?
Say again?
Open Ethereum plans on being London compatible, though, right?
Yes, but it will be the last hard fork. Basically, it's just to support the transition.
Anyway, we are planning to have at least one more release for some of their RPC changes and bug fixes.
Similar, never mind. We don't have everything yet implemented for the RPC. For London, there are some things still being revised, and there are also some other non-related features that we'll be releasing.
So I guess in that case, given all the teams have at least some tweaks to do, if we picked a block kind of after the Gordy fork, assuming it goes well, would clients be able to have a release ready by the next all core devs? Because then I think that can also be really valuable. It's if we can get to the call 2 weeks from now and have releases by all the clients, we can kind of share those, and whereas if we get to the call 2 weeks from now and then none of the clients are released and we have to wait another week for the release to go out, we probably still want a sort of 3-4 week gap between when the releases are out and when the fork happens. So would 2 weeks be a realistic amount of time for like the different teams to both, you know, fix like any bugs or add any like missing JSON RPC calls, and then also have that release contain a mainnet fork block. I see a +1 from Besu.
Yes, it seems doable for Open Ethereum also.
Yeah, so Geth currently is pretty stable. I'm not aware of any huge bug. There's Marius is investigating one slight performance regression in the tracer, but I'm a bit skeptical about that. So I guess can release whenever.
There's also, I think, the fee history API. I saw like Besu had merged that. I think Geth still had an open PR. I'm not sure about the other clients. So that seems like the one big kind of feature that's maybe not merged in most clients.
Yes, that's a pending thing.
Yeah. Is that something that's realistic to get done in the next 2 weeks as well?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So I guess, yeah, this is kind of what I would propose is like we wait and see how Gordy goes, assuming it goes smoothly. Then end of next week, early the week after, we pick a block for mainnet. I'll be gone end of next week. So if nobody has done it on Monday, I'll propose something. And then basically clients can release before the next all core devs with the mainnet block included. And that'll kind of shorten the time shorten the time that we need to have the announcement and everything. Does that make sense for everybody? Or any objections, I guess?
And would it be a month from now or a month from next Monday?
So I think we probably want like, wait, let me just look at the dates. And it's not Monday in 3 days, right? It would be like Monday in 10 days. So I suspect, you know, like a month from then would be early August. So we could probably, you know, if we wanted to be right before the difficulty bomb hits again, we could do August 4th or something like that. And that's basically the middle of the week of the last week before there's another difficulty increase. And that gives us roughly a month, yeah. Yeah.
I think that sounds like really good timing.
Okay. Okay, great. So let's see how Gordy goes. If I had a block suggestions in my spreadsheet, but if anybody wants to suggest another one or something after the fork, we can use that as well. And then when I'm back on Monday the 5th, I'll make sure that we settle on something. Cool. Anything else on London? Okay. So we had one kind of, I guess, meaty topic. So I shared this in the agenda, but we've discussed EIP 3074 a few times in the past. And Yoav made a very, elaborate thread highlighting some potential issues they saw with it, as well as some potential alternatives. And I saw the 3074 team responded after that. So maybe it makes sense. Yoav, do you want to take like a couple minutes to just kind of walk through the gist of your thread? Obviously, you know, if people have read it, that's ideal. But just, give some background there. And we can start from here.
Yes, of course. So I'm not going to repeat the whole long thread. I don't think going through all the individual issues would make sense on a call. But in general, what I was the way I was looking at it, I was looking at EIP 3074 and seeing what it aims to achieve, because it seemed to me that it's quite powerful. It's quite powerful, which also translates to risky in this case. And I wanted to see if we can, if we could achieve the same with less risk. So the things that it aims to achieve seem to be batching and account abstraction, or gas sponsorship, if you will. So So the EIP does achieve them, but it also seems like an overkill, and there may be less risky way to achieve them. So what I posted in the thread was a couple of attack vectors that it opens. So the primary issue is that auth is essentially a blank check to the invoker contract to do anything on behalf of the user, now and in the future. And the logic for restricting operations or for replay protection or anything else is entirely up to the invoker. The protocol is unopinionated about it. Now, I demonstrated a couple of ways in which it can be abused. One of them was a cross-chain attack, because the chain ID is not covered by the signature, only by the commit. So I demonstrated a case where a perfectly secure invoker runs on one chain, and the user transacts there, and then later, when the user moves assets to the other chain through a bridge, later someone deploys using the same key, deploys another invoker, and this one doesn't bother looking at the commit, so it can do whatever it wants, and then it can do anything on behalf of the user, like rob all the assets. And the other case I demonstrated was like a governance hijacking, because from the user's perspective, if there's an invoker that gives the value to the user, for example, batching transactions and maybe paying for gas during trading, so a user will use it to trade ERC20 tokens, but as long as the tokens are not stolen or anything, the user doesn't care. But then, due to a malicious bug in the invoker can vote on behalf of the user. So the invoker sits quietly, collects these signatures, and at some point it can be used to hijack the governance of some other project using the user's tokens. But so any of these vectors can be mitigated. For example, we could add the chain ID to the signature. But what I wanted to argue is that it's safer to tightly couple the user operation with the actual call by assigning the actual call data, the tool, and everything else, instead of just a commit. So all of these vectors and any others that we're not thinking of will be covered. Now, with this change, we still achieve all the goals that the EAP 3074 attempts to achieve, because anything that can be done with the current EAP will also still be possible. It just means that the wallet will have to sign a list of calls instead of a commit. So that was my main thing. And another thing that I tried to explain in the thread is that I think since we all seem to agree that the EIP adds basically set UID capability to EVM, so this is not sudo, unlike what some people say, but it is set UID. And in operating systems, set UID has been the culprit for most privilege escalation attacks over the past few decades, and different models were invented to fix it. So I wanted to suggest that we don't learn it the hard way by going through the same disasters that Linux did, and instead we can just use some time-proven models instead. So that was my purpose with this thread. I don't have a clear design for how it should be solved, just a general idea. But I wanted time to explore alternative instead of just committing to something so high risk, in my opinion.
Thanks a lot for sharing. Yeah, Light Client or Sam, I know the two of you have responded to the thread. Do you want to take a couple minutes as well to just share kind of your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I can go ahead really quick, and then Sam, you can jump in if you want. I think there's a lot of things to unpack, and so this is a pretty difficult discussion to have just like with voice, because there's many nuances to these arguments for and against 3074. I think generally, like Yoav's points are I mean, they're fair, but I think that, you know, he's focusing a lot on things that we've already said are considered unsafe. There's a lot of ways to write unsafe invokers, and things like allowing a invoker to be deployed from create. This is unsafe way of deploying an invoker. An invoker has to be something that's not malleable in any way. And he found a really neat way of doing that with the chain ID checks being in the invoker and then deploying from create and then deploying a totally different one on a different chain. So if we can ensure that the invoker is not malleable, then we can formally verify the invoker to be safe. And I don't understand these arguments about, oh, we'll just do it at the client level, because it's just code. And so if we're going to be writing code to do these checks, I would rather it be something that's open and permissionless for other people to try and develop, and something that doesn't have to go through all core devs. If we take, he gave several proposals, but we take one of his proposals, he suggested, well, there's things like replay protection that's really hard to do in a safe way, and the core development team should be the ones who are checking that these are valid proposals, and those things should be whitelisted via EIPs and go through the all core devs process. And I think this is just like the wrong approach philosophically for Ethereum. I think we should be giving tools to developers, even if some of those tools may be unsafe, but show them how to use them safely, and then let them build really strong applications. And I think like a good strawman of how this can be a safe EIP is if EIP 3074 goes live tomorrow and no wallet supports signing EIP 3074 messages with this 03 prefix, then no one is at any risk of 3074 of malicious 3074 invokers, and no one can be tricked into signing a malicious 3074 invoker because no wallet support. And I think that's like just a different way of thinking about smart contracts that we're not used to. Generally, we think of these application layer things where we shouldn't be restricting things that people want to do. But wallets are already doing some restriction to protect their users. They're generally restricting users from signing arbitrary payloads. And so if you try and sign a message, they're trying to prepend the EIP 191 prefix to it. That way you can't be tricked to signing a transaction. That might be malicious. And 3074 can be thought of in a similar way. It's not a smart contract. It's a new domain that wallets should be taking advantage of. And it should be the wallets that you're trusting to do this whitelisting and ensure that your transactions are safe, that the things you're signing are safe. And if we can't trust wallets to do these checks for us and to keep our private key safe, then I think we have a lot bigger problems.
Thanks. Sam, do you have anything to add?
Sure. So I think what it really comes down to is there's a philosophical difference between, the people who are pro 3074 and the people who aren't. One of the big concerns that Yoav has brought up is that you delegate control of your entire account to this invoker. And it's an irrevocable delegation. It's kind of like a very dangerous thing to do. And then Dan actually brought up a really good kind of comparison here, is that we don't currently have any tools in Ethereum to delegate control at all, right? So sorry. So we don't really have any controls in Ethereum right now to delegate control. So if we want to delegate control, we have to build those primitives, right? And there's different ways of building them. 3074 gives you the ability to delegate your entire control to an invoker, and then that invoker can then figure out what kind of system it wants to restrict control when it passes it on. So Dan brought up this idea of Ethereum object capabilities, which is a similar kind of idea to what Unix does, from what I understand, or Linux does. But I guess my point is we just differ fundamentally in how we think the delegation of control over your account should happen. We think that delegation should be complete, and that you delegate complete control to an invoker, then the invoker decides what to do with it. And then the other way of doing it is letting core devs decide how to delegate control, and letting client and protocol developers.
So actually, I didn't mean for core devs to decide on how to delegate. I meant that the wallet would do it, but the wallet would delegate the wallet would delegate things by actually signing the operation. So so this is by actually signing the operation. And as long as the user or the wallet on behalf of the user is willing to sign a certain operation, then the delegation is successful. The only so the thing I suggested with the all core devs was only a small, in one of the suggestions, it was a small part of the replay protection. So I don't know if we should get into the specifics of that, but the general idea is that the user will have to sign each operation. So and
by operation, you mean like a specific call, right?
Yeah, specific call. I suggested that it would actually be that instead of signing a commit that is interpreted by the by the contract, and then the contract, the invoker can do anything. The contract will only be able to perform auth calls signed by the user. So the delegation is not for the future; it's only for the current transaction and only for certain operations. And the reason I'm so concerned about it, I'm not sure I'm explaining it well enough, is that we have no precedent in Ethereum for delegating all the power for like now and in the future. And I think that delegations, I mean, we have delegations for things like voting or an approval in ERC20. So we have different models of delegation, but each of them gives limited power. Like if you approve an ERC20, you approve it up to a certain amount, and you approve it for you put it up to a certain amount and only for a certain token. So by delegating it entirely, just the damage is uncapped, is unlimited, and I'm worried that like a buggy invoker. I know that invokers will be audited, but we know that auditing sometimes doesn't catch all the bugs, especially an intentional bug that someone tries to hide, and people will have incentives for doing that. So I think that the disaster that we'll see in if someone manages to sneak in a malicious invoker that is widely used, it can be something in the order of the DAO, if not worse. So like so that's what worried me so much about this open check approach.
Vitalik, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I just wanted to also quickly summarize the issue that I brought up yesterday in my own ETH Magicians thread, which is forward compatibility with account abstraction. So basically, the idea there is that I think long-term, we're going to have to switch to account abstraction at some point. And I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons for this. Like one of them is just the big gains from having smart contract wallets for things like multi-sigs and other kinds of wallets where you can actually like not just what you can do from your wallet, but also how your transactions are authorized can be done using arbitrary cryptographic algorithms. Another kind of longer term one is quantum resistance, right? Like once we wants to make Ethereum quantum resistant, like EOAs as they currently exist just are going to be dead, right? And so if there is going to be a future, and like regardless of how medium term or long term it is, where EOAs get phased out and everyone is using a smart contract wallet of some kind, it makes sense for things done before that to be future compatible with that world. And like my concern was that the auth call mechanism in its current form doesn't really like. It feels like it goes in the opposite direction of future compatibility a little bit. Basically, because like what auth is it's this transaction, like it's a call. It's a call scoped variable that basically like introduces a new mechanism, a new way of getting the permission to send something from another account. Now, if in the future we end up actually having smart contract wallets, then auth would have to be replaced with some kind of mechanism that calls the wallet and that calls some kind of authorized function of it, and or some kind of delegate function. But then even that delegate function is not going to have the same functionality, because like there isn't really an EVM way to like do delegating that's call scoped. And so it's just like basically it feels to me like a world that has auth and auth call as opcodes, and that eventually replaces these EOAs with upgradable smart contract wallets is one that's going to have a lot of technical debt that's going to look fairly awkward 5 years from now. And I suggested a couple of alternatives. So one of them is like I think Yoav's alternative, EIP 374, where you just sign over a series of messages. It actually performs much better on that metric. Another idea was replacing auth and auth call with precompiles, just because like precompiles can be replaced with code, and they don't just kind of dangle in the EVM forever. And a third was just explicitly putting a finite lifetime on the mechanism, so developers know that eventually they're going to have to move to something else.
So I have a couple follow-up questions on that. So how do you feel about the proposal that Matt and I sketched out in your thread, where instead of putting the signature on the stack, you kind of put it into memory, a variable-sized space, and then currently that would just get verified as an ECDSA signature. But in the future, it would get sent to the smart contract wallet to do whatever verification it wants to do on that blob of bytes. That way, today it'll be a ECDSA signature, and then in the future it can be upgraded to whatever smart contract wallet system they want.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's definitely an improvement. I think even with that improvement, there's still the aspects that like you are, or this EIP, like the IP is sort of permanently complicating the call structure, in the sense that like we already have an opcode that does a call, and now we have this other opcode that does a special kind of call, or at least at present it does one thing, but then in the future it'll just be an alias for a special kind of call. So like I guess I do feel like some long-term technical debt still remains, and like if, for example, if it was a precompile, then it would be even lower still. But like that
was actually going to be my next question. So why is this is probably just my inexperience with EVM, but why is a precompile technical debt better than an opcode technical debt?
Because you can just hot swap the precompile for a piece of EVM code. Like in the case where, like in our specific case, what would happen is that the precompile would just be hot swapped for a couple of EVM code bytes that just directly call the the delegate function of whatever the target account is. And so
okay, and like you can't implement like an opcode in terms of other opcodes right now, or
right. Well, the problem is that like it would be part of the like inside of the EVM, you would have to have code in that specific opcode, right? Like it would have to, like it would be a permanent feature of whatever file in the code that processes the VM opcodes. Whereas if it's a precompile, then you'd said like for now it would be the same code, except it would be in the precompile section instead of in the opcode section. But then in the future, like there would not need to be any Ethereum code for that case at all. Or any Ethereum client code for that case at all, because it would just be entirely bytecode of the contract.
Okay.
Well, aren't we moving in a direction where we want to be able to get to a place where we can just sync to a certain point and we don't have to verify all the blocks, because we can just use the weak subjectivity of these two committees, and then we can drop features?
Mm-hmm.
So
exactly.
So to me, it's like those are things that we can drop, right?
I agree with that. So theoretically, like any feature can be dropped, right? So that's why idea 3, for example, was just to give this whole mechanism a finite lifetime. But with making it a precompile, like basically the benefit is that eventually we can we can drop the code from clients, and so client complexity goes down. But at the same time, like there's no disruption to a developer experience. So developers who start relying on that mechanism tomorrow, like that'll still keep working 20 years from now. So it's sort of a best of all worlds.
Oh, Ansgar, I see you have your hand up, and then yeah, Alex, if you want to go after.
Yeah, so I just briefly wanted to ask a bit of like a more process question or something, because to me it feels like it's a little bit of an unfortunate situation that we only have this kind of single track all code devs call where all kind of the whole spectrum of proposed changes is being discussed. And I think specifically with 3074, this is like a really good kind of example where we as a team kind of went out and talked with a lot of the more kind of application focused teams that actually would want to use it. And there was a lot of excitement, a lot of kind of different input, and we kind of tried to formulate that into an ERP. Then it kind of took 6 months or something like 4 months for people to look at it, to get feedback. Now I think actually like a lot of this feedback is really kind of helpful, and I'm very much not married to kind of the version of the ERP as it is today. I still think like it's some of the criticism was unfair, but in any case, like they're definitely open to changes. But like it just seems really inefficient to basically always go through this OCODEF venue basically, and then it'll take some more months to have a next proposal, and then it'll take them some more months to get feedback on it. So by the time then, yeah, I'm just wondering, is there like some process change or something that would make it easier to basically separate the kind of the protocol discussion and changes more cleanly from the feature discussion in some way? I don't know. Maybe that's nonsensical, but that's just what I'm wondering about.
I think I see what you mean. I think so. First of all, I think that the conversation on ETH magicians is obviously like very valuable. I think the best we can kind of do in Alcor Devs is like summarize it and point people there to actually like resolve the issue there. I don't think we can't like we can solve these, like like Klein said at the beginning. There's a lot of subtleties and whatnot. I'm not sure like what's the best, like I know there's already like a Discord room to discuss this. What do you feel would be like the best kind of, I don't know, process? Yeah, do you think we just need like specific calls for 3074 where we can hash this out? Yeah. And yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that.
I don't know specifically. Like I think we can definitely find a solution for 3074 to kind of try and be more efficient in discussing it and something. I'm just wondering maybe like if the next thing comes around that like is a bit more on the feature side. If we basically have to then find a kind of custom solution for it again, or if they, I don't even know, like maybe they could. I don't want to propose just in another call or something, but it just feels like basically it's a little bit inefficient that like the core dev process is this kind of single track thing where all different kinds of changes are being discussed or something. But yeah, I think for 3074 is like specifically, we can definitely kind of find a solution.
Yeah, I agree with Messi. I think, the part where it is hard to separate is the fact that it obviously touches consensus, right? So it's like at the end of the day, you will need clients to implement it. But I feel like a big part of the conversation maybe does not involve like all the client teams, and that's something we can kind of take out, right? Like iterating towards a proposal, and having something, yeah, I don't know, that say addresses like the stuff we just discussed, doesn't have to happen on all core devs. But at the end of the day, it's like, because all the client teams have to implement it, we're going to need to like bring it up and discuss it here. Yeah, we can talk about this offline. I'll try to think about it as well. Like I agree. Sometimes this feels like a bottleneck, and yeah, if we can make that lighter, if we can make that better, yeah, we should. Vitalik, you still have your hand up? Is that?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to kind of add on to that like it's definitely a problem I feel as well. Like I have some proposals that I've been promoting. Like state expiry is one of them. Banning self-destruct to make the Virgil tree implementation considerably simpler is another one. And like these ideas where like I personally would want them to be whacked sooner rather than later. And it's definitely like ideal to have a format where people either have concerns or people wants to investigate to figure out whether what kinds of issues they have, and then actually incorporate more people's feedback without it being stuck as part of a 90-minute call every 2 weeks. Is it's definitely something that would be really valuable to keep improving.
Yeah, and I know what we did for 1559, and what stuff like the Portal network is doing is they just have their own kind of different set of calls, right? Like on their own schedule and whatever frequency makes sense for them. The challenge is like as you add more calls, you lose the number of attendees, and so some of the complaints that like people have said is like like if you do a call for like state expiry and like nobody shows up, that's not great. And I know like we've had calls about state expiry specifically, right? Like the past couple of weeks. So I don't know if it's like every one of those efforts trying to like set up their own schedule, which makes sense. I'm happy to help facilitate that. It does feel like when we do things just async, at some point the discussion kind of stalls. And maybe that's like the right cue that we need some sort of synchronous call. Yeah.
I think it would be useful for a brief discussion on what things people want to see or know about 3074 to feel safer about it, because I think there are like concerns raised. It's really difficult to get these things resolved whenever we're just discussing them on all core devs and there's like less engagement outside of it. And it's like a hard problem because I don't want to enforce that people are being engaged in these things, especially with a dissenting opinion, because that can get messy. But it's also how can we work together to get something that is very valuable to the community. The community is really desiring to have functionality that's similar to 3074. We've put in a lot of work to bring an EIP that we think is good and safe and reasonable to put on mainnet. And so I'm curious, what things do we need to do still to have it potentially be scheduled for a hard fork?
Think of a better security model than what you are proposing.
I mean, I'm willing to engage with you.
That's not useful.
I'm willing to engage with you if you want to ever like actually discuss these things, but I feel like your tone is just really disrespectful when we discuss these things. And it doesn't. And I tried to engage with you on Twitter after last All-Port Devs, and you just stopped responding. So I'm happy to like talk on a call and like try and figure out a better model if you want to do that. But I think that just like one-off comments like this is just not really helping us get to where we want to go.
I'm just stating how it is right now. I mean, it literally is setuid.
This isn't Linux though. This is a very different platform.
Yeah, and users' funds will get swept away, or we will get a permission blockchain in effect.
I'd like to kindly raise that I also consider Artem's tone very often a bit offensive.
Yeah, Artem, if you could just try and be respectful in your criticism, I think people would appreciate that.
I think that the way that 3074 is proposed is actually the least permissioned way of doing something like this. I think that the way that Yoav has his proposals is sort of creating this new pipeline of new type of things that need to go through the All-Port Devs process. And I understand that like your whitelisting of replay protection is one specific thing, but what you propose is not as powerful as 3074 because you are enshrining certain things. You can't have synthetic EOAs. If you want to have replay protection that's other than like maybe sequential nonces or something that's not already built in, these are things that you also have to go through the All-Port Devs process. So what we've presented is something where anybody can write something. It's up to the wallets to make sure that it's safe, just like wallets have to already make sure that the code that touches your private key is safe. And so this is just further enshrining like what wallets are doing to keep you safe. And if you don't like what wallets are doing, you can fork the wallet. This is much simpler than trying to fork Ethereum. If you don't like what the core does and you really want to do something that 3074 isn't letting you do, that core devs aren't letting you do.
So I never said that all innovation would have to go through the all core dev, and only one of the three options I presented actually involved all core devs and only for the replay protection. So I don't think it's the most permissionless way to achieve this, because even if the client needs to sign, even if the wallet needs to sign the entire message, you can still achieve everything. You can still deploy any invoker you like, and you don't need to.
But you can't. You can't deploy any invoker you like, because if you're signing over a nonce, then the protocol has to define how that nonce is interpreted. And if you do the way that normal EOAs are, where it's sequentially validated nonce, that is the one way that nonces are done. If you want to do something different, where you have parallel nonces or you have one-off nonces, these are things that you would have to go and have a proposal to change.
Right. So that's exactly the one exception I mentioned, and I suggested deploying separate contracts for replay protection because there aren't that many methods. But even if we completely disregard that and we say we don't protect the nonce, let's say that we leave the nonce to the invoker, although I'm not a fan of that. But still, if we end up with something much more secure than the current version, because at worst, under attack of a malicious invoker, the user's message can be replayed, but the user's message can never be modified. So if the user never signed a certain operation, nobody can trigger this operation. In the current version, they can.
Sure, but then there are other things that we might want to do where we have malleability in the call. And I think a really great example of this is having social recovery, where you can sign over a list of people, never put it on chain. And now if you lose your EOA, you can go to those people and have them sign some sort of multi-signature and recover your funds. And that's not possible in the thing you proposed. That's something that, again, we would have to add as a new feature.
Actually, why not? Why not? You can give them such signed messages, but these messages are specific. Yeah, you don't give them power to do anything. You give them a signed message allowing them to make a very specific call to help you recover.
Yeah, but you don't know all the assets you'll have at the point of time when you lose your key, so you can't foresee everything that you need to send over.
No, it would be a call to replace a key that can sign any message on behalf of this wallet.
But you can't recover the private key, because you are saying that we have to assert all these things like call data and gas and nonce are part of this commit in the protocol. So then you can't change who can sign over those things.
No, but you can.
You have to recover.
Yeah. You would have to. Together they would be able to enable a recovery mode, and we don't have to dive into the specifics of how this recovery mode works, but you can give them transactions that they have to sign, that you have to sign in advance and change the state of the wallet in a way that makes recovery possible.
But again, these are things that were not part of your proposal that need to be added through the core devs process. This is my point.
Oh, why do you need them in the core devs? It can
so sorry, it seems like we're kind of hitting diminishing returns here.
Sorry.
And there's a lot of conversation in the chat about having like a separate venue to discuss this in more detail. I think that's something we can come up with. But one of the things I just want to make sure we cover is, Alex, you had some comments with regards to how this impacts address space extension. So maybe it's worth just taking like 2 minutes to go over those. We don't necessarily have to discuss them in detail, but just so everybody's kind of aware of it and the issue.
Yes, some background. So address space extension basically is the aim to extend the addresses from being 20 bytes to maybe 32 bytes. And this is driven by two reasons. One, to increase collision resistance, and two, larger addresses could have reserved bits or bytes, which can be used for other use cases. And one such use case would be state expiry, where the epoch or period number would be stored there. Now, we have, as a team, looked into the impact of address space extension on the current EVM. And we just released today a longer document with like 15 points explaining the different kind of issues, or at least the impact we have found. But I want to mention only two different things here. One, with address space extension and even with state expiry with multiple periods, that would mean that a single private key could correspond to multiple addresses. It could correspond to like a current short address, or it could correspond to a long address, or it could correspond to multiple long addresses in different periods. And if you have this, then I think we really have to look into how the signature recovery works in the opcode under EIP 3074, because you need to make a decision, which of these addresses you want to recover. I don't have any suggestion. I just wanted to raise this as a discussion point for the future, because I guess the main question here is the timing of all of these discussions and features. If 3074 is deemed to be really important, maybe over any of the state expiry, and maybe I used the wrong word, it's not the importance, but rather, how ready these proposals are. And if we say that 3074 is more ready and it is ready to go in maybe in the next 2 hard forks, and maybe the state expiry and address space extension is less ready and it may take like 3-4 hard forks from today. In that case, I guess these concerns have to be addressed post 3074. But if you think that these two proposals are kind of maybe at the similar level of readiness, then we probably should decide which we prefer more and adjust the other one. So if we say that address space extension is something which is really important, then we have to make sure that 3074 works with it correctly and covers all these cases. If 3074 would go in earlier, then all of these differences have to be handled afterwards. I'm not sure if all of this made too much sense. Probably it did to those who are familiar with the topic. But yeah, please read the document I shared, and it may help to make sense of what I said.
Can I add just one thought? So with this whole address space extension, I think we would be opening up quite a big can of worms. And if we make addresses exactly the same length as hashes, then we are opening up a gigantic can of worms, because all of a sudden you cannot differentiate anymore in code whether something is an address or is a hash. And I think a lot of things can go horribly wrong in that case. So I don't really want to talk for or against extending the address space, but I would really think, I really think it's a bad idea to make the addresses the same length as hashes.
Would 31 bytes be fine in your view?
Anything that doesn't conflict with me.
Okay.
I mean, if we were to do that, we could even do, I don't know, 34 bytes with some checksums or whatever. So.
Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing, Alex. And yeah, one thing, so Micah, you mentioned this in the chat. I just want to make sure people are aware there is a 3074 Discord channel. So if people want to continue that conversation there, yeah, please do. We only had 2 other things on the agenda, and they're more just kind of for people to be aware. But first of all, Rick added a transaction type list to the ETH1 specs repo. I'll share the PR here, just to try and list basically all the transaction types that we already have reserved and some that are potentially being reserved to avoid potential collisions. So for example, in the case of 3074, their EIP uses type 3, so just listing it there. So if people want to just review that, yeah, I know Light Client, you've reviewed it already in Mica as well, but just this way we can kind of keep a list, and it makes it helpful for libraries and anyone kind of using this type transactions to know what are the types that exist and what are the types that are potentially reserved for future use. I don't know, Rick, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think it's pretty straightforward. Yeah.
Cool. I guess I'll leave it at that, and we can merge it sometime next week if there's no objections on it. And then last thing, also on the ETH1 specs repo, Light Client and I think the Quilt team more generally have been working on a Python executable spec for ETH1. Light Client, you want to give some background there and kind of share where you're at?
Sure. So we've been really impressed with how Ethereum 2 development has gone with their PySpec, and there's like many other reasons why maybe writing a PySpec for Ethereum 1 is useful, but the way that Ethereum 2 has been able to use it as this mechanism to discuss changes about the protocol, I think has been really valuable. If you look at how 1559 it has been described in the EIP, basically we had to, someone wrote a broken Ethereum implementation in Python just to describe all the changes. So as we're adding new things to Ethereum, I think it's really valuable. I also think that it's valuable just to have a full specification of Ethereum and a little bit more readable language. A concern that a lot of people have is that the yellow paper is more difficult to read, especially if you don't necessarily have a background in more formal mathematics. If you're just a developer, can be unwieldy to go through. So we've been taking some time to implement Ethereum 1 in Python, and this is different than how the snake charmers have done this in the past, because there have been Python clients before. What we want to do here is we want to focus on readability, not do the engineering that clients need to do to be performant and keep up with mainnet and all these things. We want to avoid using any Python specific language functionality. We want to just do the most simple way that people who are just tangentially familiar with Python can come in and understand how Ethereum works. And then hopefully one day in the future, we can use it to discuss core changes to Ethereum rather than rewriting half of Ethereum in an EIP to kind of set the scene for the change. So that's what we've been doing. Sam and Somu on the Cool team have been working really hard to build that stuff out. And I think we're having in a good place where we're very open to more external contributors. There's been one person who's helped contribute who is not part of any of the core teams that I'm aware of. But yeah, we've got a lot of issues on the GitHub, and hopefully we can move it into the Ethereum 1, the official upstream Ethereum 1 specs repo, and then have a lot of issues that anyone interested can jump in and help out, or if people want to just like keep an eye on what's happening to review those things, that would be great.
Another thing the 2.0 specs repo has been really useful for is test writing, which is to accompany any changes, like actually writing tests, but then actually using the not very efficient, but at least somewhat readable Python implementation to generate test vectors. And I think that we still use like a stripped down version of Alice to do that today. So maybe in the long term, you could consider moving test generation to something like that. And then the ETH2 specs repo, which is kind of like the proof of stake consensus layer, come the merge, is being written in a pretty modular way that if an execution layer has a certain interface, we can kind of plug it in and even do end-to-end test generation, which may or may not be useful. We'll see.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing, guys. Anyone have thoughts, comments? Okay. Yeah, Marius, go ahead. Update on 3607. This was the issue of interpreting, like having the private key to an already deployed contract, right?
Yes. So rejecting transactions where the sender has some deployed code. Basically, someone requested us to have a full sync of mainnet with the new rules to see that this hasn't happened yet. It hasn't. There's one outstanding issue that we would need to discuss because right now this is checked. This clause is checked by verifying or by taking the code size and checking that the code size is 0. But it might make sense to check if the code hash is the empty code hash. So if anyone has any preferences in either way, I think it should be basically the same, but it should be consistent across the spec and across the implementations. Yeah.
Alex, you have your hand up.
Yeah, that's an interesting point regarding precompiles, because precompiles have 0 code and you don't want to impersonate them. And the code hash, I think the ERP for the X code hash instruction at least specifies, what should happen in empty accounts or accounts without code, etc. So maybe that's something to something useful to look into, because you don't want to impersonate precompiles either. I mean, it's even less potentially possible, but it would be nice to at least have it clarified.
Denkrad?
Oh yeah, I mean, like, I don't think, because I mean, the difficulty of finding a pre-image of a precompile is like 2 to the 160. So I don't think that is an issue. Like you can just ignore that. So I wouldn't worry about that. Like, it's a completely different thing. The one is potentially possible. The other one we can consider cryptographically impossible. Finding pre-images of precompiles.
Because the precompiles are already deployed, right?
Exactly. Like, it would have, someone would have to have deployed them and the addresses are like 0, 1, 2, 3, right? So you can't really do that for these addresses. They would have to be deployed at a random address, and like some developer in this call would have to have influenced that address.
Got it. I guess, does anyone have any objections about using the code hash rather than the code size? Okay, then I guess we can go with that. That's all we had on the agenda. Was there anything else anybody wanted to bring up? Okay. Well, yeah, thanks everybody. So let's see how Gordy goes for London next week. And assuming everything goes well, we'll post a blog for mainnet and try and get client releases out for the next Awkward Devs, where we can then share the release numbers to everyone. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks. Have a nice day.